Okay, hello and welcome. I am happy to have as my guest Ms. Catherine Johnson, who is the director of the Family Justice Center since 2014. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for being on this program.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah. So tell me about the Family Justice Center. It's actually the Kay Cashin Family Justice Center, just renamed.
Yeah, technically the building is named the Kay
Okay.
Cashin Center. But the Family Justice Center is housed within that, and Commissioner Cashin had quite a bit of influence in helping to get the Family Justice Center alive and coming to fruition here in Greensboro. In short, the Family Justice Center is a one-stop shop. It's one place where someone who's experiencing child abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, elder abuse can come and access a multitude of different services and supports to help them navigate what they're going through.
Wow. That was one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, was how this organization had started, I guess Kay Cashin's involvement with it, and all the little details in between. So you were involved when it had first started in 2014.
So in 2012 and in 2013, Guilford County and Greensboro kind of got a bad reputation. More people were killed here as a result of domestic violence than anywhere else in the state of North Carolina. And that was something that the police department was talking a lot about. Lots of people in elected seats were saying, what's happening here? We have a lot of resources designated to this area. We have some really great community-based agencies addressing this issue. Why do we have such a problem? And so a group of folks started doing some listening and learning sessions, reading things about other frameworks in other places across the country. And that was included Councilmember Boozawaiter, Commissioner Kay Cashin, the Chief of Police at the time, the Clerk of Court, a District Court Judge, the CEO of Family Services of Piedmont, a big group of people, about 20, who served in the steering committee capacity. And that committee decided that they wanted to do a Family Justice Center here in Guilford County. And so once that kind of decision was made, is saying, we want that framework to happen here, and then we need somebody to come in and help us make that happen. I joined in 2014. I was hired by Guilford County to kind of help take the vision and turn it into a reality, an operational plan, an integrated collaborative, and help pull it off, and was here for about 11 months before we opened our office in Greensboro in 2015.
Tell me about those first steps you had to take, because I'm sure that's very difficult, getting the name out, getting the word out, and integrating all these agencies into one.
Yeah, so if collaboration was easy, everybody would do it. But it's really complicated when you have a large police unit with their own policies and procedures, and a large legal component with their own policies and procedures, and social services and medical services and mental health services and advocacy services. I mean, all of those are different service lines that exist within the Family Justice Center. Most people, when they think about collaboration, kind of fall in the networking category. Like, I know you, you know me, we are networking, which is a form of collaboration. But what we're really striving for at the Family Justice Center is capacity building for partners, not self-capacity. So when the police department is at optimal operation, then that benefits me and the public. When social services is at optimal operation, that benefits them, it benefits me, it benefits the public. So it's complicated, it's hard work, it's very relationship focused, so it's not driven by a procedure manual, it's not driven by a bunch of mandates and rules. It took a lot of flexibility. My background's actually mental health, and I used to say in the early days, I started in mental health doing family therapy, and it's like systems therapy, right? You're helping to bring all these different people and kind of get them working toward the same mission and goals. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of relationship capital. And I think there was just a real appetite to make it happen, and when we did listening sessions with folks in our community who had experienced violence and abuse, child abuse, sexual violence, domestic violence, they said a couple things real clear from the beginning. The first thing they said is, why does it feel like I'm in trouble when I'm asking for help? And when we looked at what their experience was, they may be going through courthouse security where defendants are also often entering. They may be going to the police department when people are filing a police report and they're asking for help. They could be in a line at social services or going to a community-based agency with a multitude of resources when it felt kind of complicated. And the second thing that they said really consistently is, I don't want to go all around town. I would like to get everything from one place. And so that's what, our kind of marching orders were. We want people to feel like they're put first, that victims of crime and abuse can be prioritized, and we want to consolidate those resources in one location so that they can get helped better.
Wow. And that's, I was just saying, that's a lot of different organizations to to put together. And when you do things like this, I'm just thinking from, you know, life experience type of things, is you have a lot of people that want to, you know, take credit for something like that. You know what I mean? And it falls in a lot of different perspectives. But
well, and to that point, I will say when the Family Justice Center first opened, I mean, I can't tell you the number of people that was like, that was my idea, or I served on that committee, or I, and in some ways I'm like, well, that's a good thing. Of course, we want as many people as possible to think like one location and bringing those agencies together. But what we know is ego and money keep people from collaborating every day. And for our mission at the Family Justice Center, really saying we want services to be accessible to those who've been harmed, and we want to hold those who are doing harm accountable. And that means you have to look beyond your ego and the pot of money to have a bigger vision. And as a result, you'll get more credit and you'll get more money. It's just how it works. But it's a risk that most organizations are a little timid or hesitant to take.
right. So I'm imagining you have to have a lot of patience and you know, skill to work with all those different people. And I could tell, you know, you're very good at what you do.
Yeah, I mentioned to you before I came in, I run marathons. I ran my first marathon right before the Family Justice Center in Greensboro opened. And I remember like right before I ran that first marathon, I'm like, gosh, Family Justice Center work is like marathon training. You're like doing these long, slow runs, and it takes a lot of time, and it's really patient.
And it doesn't feel like you're getting anywhere.
Yeah,
sometimes.
it doesn't. It just is hours of hard work. But in Family Justice Center work, it's very similar. It's slow. You have to be really thoughtful and strategic in how you would ask a question, or how you try to motivate a partner agency or a person or a decision that's being made. It's not a sprint. It's not done quickly. When we look at Family Justice Centers across the country, the ones that thrive are the ones that are slow and steady and really focused on a mission beyond any individual organization. But that's hard work, and it's a long, steady process to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure this reputation has grown, obviously, because you have served, 95,000 people now?
Yeah, we'll be celebrating our 10th anniversary in June, and we're almost to hit the 100,000 number of visits mark.
Obviously, this reputation has built over time and has sustained. Tell me about the staff. How many staff members do you have?
Yeah, so within our Greensboro office, it's about 125 professionals that represent kind of 15 different agencies. In our High Point office, it's about 45 professionals that represent 12 different organizations. It's a unique model, so I have a very small team. I was one of three when I started, with coordinating about 50 professionals from disciplines, and now I have a team of 15 between Greensboro and High Point. And really our job as a small team is we are responsible for the collaboration component. People will not do it organically. You kind of have to foster it. So our team does all the initial intakes and then kind of helps connect the dots. And if we see an opportunity where two agencies or three or four or five could work together, we kind of foster that so that we can make sure that we're keeping things in that integrated collaborative framework so that people don't have to duplicate what they're doing.
And then do you have like caseworkers for like individuals that can you know, facilitate whatever somebody's going through?
Sure. So how it works is when someone comes into the center, they get checked in, and then we have a process called navigation, which is like a triage would be in an ED, right? So someone's going to meet with you and say, is this a head problem, a leg problem, a heart problem? They're doing an evaluation and a risk assessment. How dangerous is the situation? And then the next function that the navigator does is they are trained in what all of the agencies do at the FJC. So they're never going to make a referral where somewhere you get turned away from. We don't give out brochures or information. We talk about the person is the brochure, be the brochure to the person that you're helping. And so their job is to really make good connections and hold the partners accountable to following through with that person versus putting the burden on the person who needs help to navigate all the agencies. We navigate that for them. And so let's say, for example, this is a pretty classic domestic violence example. A mom is assaulted by her husband while she's holding her baby. The neighbor calls the police. Well, that's a scenario alone where at least 10 different agencies can be involved, from the Family Justice Center, from Greensboro Police to the Sheriff's Office to a judge to a clerk to a district attorney to court services to Family Services of the Piedmont to Elon Legal Services to Children's Law Center to DSS. I could keep going. All of those people work at the Family Justice Center because we wouldn't want that mom with the baby to have to navigate all those agencies by herself. We help her do that.
Right. Wow. So when they come in, and let's say, you know, the domestic, I'm imagining, is one of your most like common.
Yeah, it's
what you
primary,
see.
but I would also say that many people who are experiencing domestic violence have had a prior experience of child abuse or sexual violence. It's just the easiest thing to report. It's the most acceptable form of abuse that's discussed.
So yeah, because now that we know that, I mean, what is the commonality there that people who are just abused from childhood are just likely to find an abuser like later on in their life? What is the commonality?
Yeah. If you're living in a home with violence and abuse, or you experience abuse, you have a higher chance of either growing up to be an abuser or to be abused. So there is a correlation between that. But what we know about violence and abuse in any type, domestic violence or sexual violence, elder abuse, it's often rooted in a dynamic of power and control, where someone's trying to have coercion or control or manipulation over you. And here in Greensboro, our youngest client has been a day-old baby where mom was assaulted and the baby was born almost prematurely. And our oldest client has been a 98-year-old woman who lives in a high-rise downtown, whose granddaughter was taking her money and she didn't want her to. So that spectrum can be really wide, but what we see most commonly is that people who are doing harm are trying to have power or control over the person, creating that victimization.
Okay, so we started to talk about the process. So there's usually, I'm guessing most of the time, there's a police call or somebody has to seek you out, right?
That's right.
They would need, somebody who needs help needs to want help, right?
Yeah, so everybody coming into the Family Justice Center, it's all voluntary. They're not required to be there. If they were to call 911, Greensboro Police would say, you should go to the Family Justice Center. If they call Family Services of the Piedmont's Crisis Hotline, it's a 24/7 line, they would say, you should go to the Family Justice Center. If they show up in the courthouse and they're wandering around trying to figure out how to file a restraining order, they'll say, you should go to the Family Justice Center. So our partner agencies refer people back to the Family Justice Center. In addition, we've been open long enough. About a third of people who visit or hear from it or word of mouth, someone they know who's had a positive experience. And we survey our visitors, and 99% say, I feel safe when I'm there. I feel respected. I feel like my privacy is protected. And we have thousands of surveys that communicate that. If they made it easier on me and I felt really intimidated, and they made it a little hard thing better. And that's our goal, is to make the hard things better.
Mm-hmm. How do you, I guess, maintain that environment of just, people feeling safe when they come to the Family Justice Center?
So I think, it's part workplace culture. Do we set the tone from the time you open the door and the receptionist is very friendly and welcoming? I think we've worked really hard and learned some lessons over the past 10 years of putting the right professionals in the center. So picking the right cops, picking the right social workers, picking the right attorneys. And collaboration's not for everybody. Some people like to kind of work in their cube and do their thing and not be interrupted or questioned or kind of pushed sometimes. But the people that work at the Family Justice Center, the professionals there, really understand it's a little bit bigger than themselves. It's a little bit bigger than their singular organization. And I think that work culture creates an invitation for people coming in, and they see it. They can feel it. They're like, I can tell people really work well together here. This feels like a family. That's how we describe ourselves. And we'll tell someone who's going through a lot, a survivor or victim, will say, we got your back. Let us take on some of the burden. You've been through enough. And that fosters that relationship that wants them to keep coming back or reach out to us if there's something else arises, or tell a friend about coming to us as well. The national statistic, which is pretty interesting, is 1 in 3 women and 1 in 8 men will be impacted by violence and abuse at some point in their life. So it's a mainstream challenge that, for many reasons, violence and abuse, one predominantly, is it's just such a private situation. So people kind of lock their door when they lock in those secrets at home, and you don't tell anybody, you don't talk about it. But it's a very prevalent challenge. And I mean, that can be verbal abuse and being talked down to and treated poorly, and it can escalate to strangulation, which is one of the most lethal forms of violence and abuse. So the spectrum is really wide. And we see all those people at the center. It's not just physical abuse or not just sexual abuse. It could be people who have been financially exploited, or people who are just really significantly verbally abused and just feel like they don't have any options and they feel stuck.
It's interesting. When my son was born, I was talking to some of the nurses there, and they said, you'd be amazed at how many, because I saw a cop on our floor, and I was like, what's going on? And they said, well, unfortunately, you see, we get a lot of, domestic issues on this floor. I was like, why are your kids being born? They said, it happens a lot. They said, you'd be amazed at how, you'd become a feminist if you worked on this floor. And this was like the special needs, at Duke, like.
Oh yeah.
So-
Well, yeah, and like pregnancy is a risk factor for domestic violence, and the reason for that is if violence and abuse is rooted in power and control, and then a victim is pregnant and she's getting attention and affirmation from other people and exposure to other people, that starts to expose the abuse. If you're going to a medical appointment and they're asking you about safety, or you're spending more time with family members, that creates risk to an abuser of, I'm losing control of that person and she's getting attention and I want all the attention. So it is a period of time. That's an intersection we see a lot around elder abuse, where adult children move out of the home, and now it's just the husband and wife. And then violence and abuse can happen in same-sex relationships, heterosexual relationships. Men can be abused, but in this example I'll give of where the wife has been this caretaker of the family and done all these things, and now they're at this new intersection where they go to empty nesting and things escalate at home because the husband's no longer happy and has a lot of other expectations. It's interesting where these patterns kind of show each up in transition.
Well, because the dynamic shifts entirely.
That's right.
It's no longer about you.
That's right. That's right.
You know what I mean? You're taking on a whole different burden.
That's right.
It totally changes everything.
That's right.
So it's literally true what they say. Like when you have a kid, everything changes.
That's exactly right.
And you're trying to keep a human alive. Like
that's right. That's right. Which is not easy.
No. Yeah. So I wanted to go back to this pathway of So we've gone from maybe a neighbor or someone is seeking help and they come in, and you kind of gather them in the right direction of what they may need based on their particular situation, whether that's the courts, whether that's, we got to take care of the kids too, right?
That's right, yep.
I'm just trying to think of all the little things of what somebody would do. The steps you follow, I guess you would follow them through the court, like you follow their process.
That's right.
The whole way. So like from the time someone comes into the Family Justice Center, like how long would their, I guess you could say, case, how long would you follow their case?
Yeah, so about a third of people coming into the center file for a restraining order, and we actually have a courtroom at the Family Justice Center, which is kind of neat. They can file an emergency protective order from the center. It's a video chat with the judge. They don't have to go through the courthouse. Restraining order, permanent hearing, so 10 days later you have to go to court and face your accuser. So typically people who are kind of involved in that process, they'll probably come in and out of the Family Justice Center pretty frequently over the course of 3 or 4 months. And then things kind of start to settle down. And we know that leaving or separating from an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time. Your risk of harm goes way up. So we want to stay real activated. And I say we, I mean all of our partner agencies. So we have some partners who do more like case management. So they'll call pretty frequently and check in pretty frequently. Where like our law enforcement partners and our district attorney's office, they may not start that check-in until closer to the court date. But if there's criminal charges, like let's say the person's been charged for an assault or some type of crime, that's a very slow-moving process. So it can be 18, 24 months before the case would ever go to court. But we have partners who provide court accompaniment when that time comes, and we keep a pulse on folks. We want people to feel like they can come into the Family Justice Center as many times as possible. And while we have some crisis response, and I think like filing for a restraining order, talking to a police, meeting with an attorney, we also have some long-term support like group counseling and mental health services. And so if you're accepting resources like that, you may come to the Family Justice Center 30 or 40 times. I mean, that would be within reason over the course of kind of working through what you've been through.
Wow. And I'm guessing it's just going back to your point, like when the abuser, I guess in this case, would feel like they are losing control, and now their world is just turned upside down.
That's
right. Now they got criminal charges. Now the person that they were controlling, if you will, is leaving.
That's right.
Or in the process of leaving, and you have lost complete control of the situation.
That's right. Yeah, so that's the most dangerous time, and I think when we look at homicide trends, we really put an emphasis on like if someone comes to the Family Justice Center, their chance of survival is like 99+%. And that's not only a statistic for Guilford County, but that's a nationwide statistic, is that when someone comes to a Family Justice Center, they get that wraparound support, pressure is put on the person who's doing harm, the defendant, the abuser, whichever term you want to use, then we can increase public safety. It's just making sure people know the resources there. Even though we've been around 10 years, there are plenty of people who are like, I've never heard of you. And most people don't think about what they need in a crisis until they're in the crisis. And we can all think of a time where we've been there too, right? An emergency happens, so a car accident, for example, and you're like, oh, who's my insurance company? Who's my agent? I mean, those things happen in family safety issues too, right? You don't think about the emergency until you're living in it, and then you start to try to figure out, where do I go next and what do I do next?
Wow. Okay, that's pretty cool. That's good. So tell me about running this marathon again. How long have you been running?
So I've probably been running maybe 15 or so years, but marathon, I think I've done one marathon a year every year since the Family Justice Center opened. So I think I'm getting ready to do my 10th marathon in a couple of weeks.
Wow. And that's like a correlation with you running ever since the Family Justice Center opened.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a real mental strain to running. I've been running since I was like 15 years old, 14 years old, and I love there's a definite difference. My wife will notice a definite difference in me if I take time off or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's just that mental output or that physical output that's just not there.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think, I one marathon a year. Like, I'm just a general. I enjoy running, and a lot of it is just it's part stress management. It's also like I really like being outdoors. Something about the cadence of running is just really good for your brain and your body at the same time. I think the marathon training is always a good reminder of like, yeah, collaboration's hard, just like this is hard, and you can do hard things, and doing hard things, you have to pace yourself, and you have to get the right amount of sleep and eat the right foods, and it comes with a level of discipline, which I think collaboration is totally necessitates discipline as well. I can't just spout off at somebody or try to coerce somebody or manipulate somebody or say I'm in charge or call their command if something's not going well. I mean, it's a real relationship focused discipline to kind of make things happen.
Tell me about that collaboration. Do you see this expanding to different areas? Are you seeing maybe the need has changed over the years? Are you seeing any kind of expansion?
Yeah, so I mean, we are always fluid and flexible. So you don't get opened up and arrive and stay exactly the same, which is kind of unique to be in government and be thinking about being flexible and fluid. We've grown a lot. I mean, when we first opened, we didn't have legal consultation, and that was an unmet need in the first 6 months. So I went down to Elon Law School, just a couple blocks down the street, and I said, hey, are you interested in a legal clinic? And they said, maybe we are, and helped them write a grant and get a legal clinic stood up, which we have today. Over the past year, some things we've identified as victims going to court. The courtroom is the most intimidating place for a victim of abuse. And so we've been working with retirees, retired police and court officials and clerks and survivors who are in a retirement space who are going to court with victims and serving as a court accompaniment with someone who's having a real difficult time, and survivors are saying it's made a total game changer for them.
Just to have somebody there who kind of knows the process and knows.
Who's not intimidated to sit in a courtroom because they maybe have had a prior experience or worked in the system in some way. Yeah, and they love it because they're like, oh, the pressure's off me. I'm not the detective in this case, or I'm not the clerk. I'm just an ally with this person who feels vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah, I guess that would be, and especially if you've been, they've been through the ringer a couple times.
Yeah.
You've been on the stand a couple times.
Yeah,
you know what to expect.
You get it. That's right.
And so tell me about so we were talking about the Elon clinic. Tell me about the benefit there. Is that to have students be a part of, like law students be a part of this process?
So law students are in internship roles through the Emergency Legal Services Clinic. And the main function of the clinic is when someone comes in, they can get legal advice before they decide to file a restraining order or before they decide to maybe talk with a police officer about their situation. Information about options is one of the number one things people coming in want. I want to know what my options are, and I want to make sure that myself and my family are safe. And so Elon provides like a consultation clinic where they talk to people about what they've got going on and what their needs are, and then give legal advice as a result of that. which really helps people make more informed decisions about what they want to do. And the more informed your decision making is, the more likely you are to follow through. You're not feeling forced or pushed or shoved around by some system saying, these are the 10 things you have to do to get out of this situation, which is often how people feel. They feel like there's these checklists that they have to do what someone's telling them. We want to empower the person the survivor, to make decisions for themselves. And so kind of trying to disrupt that like to-do list that often gets put out of like, well, if you do all these things, then we'll do this. We don't want to create that dynamic.
Wow. And this is good because you have students that are involved, but you also have, legal professionals that are also sort of, guiding that whole situation too.
That's right.
They've been through this. They know what's going on. They know
That's
the
right.
process. They know the steps. They know the legalities of it all.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. One of the other things I was thinking of was how can people reach out to you? How can people, find you? What order, online and everything else with phone number, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so we have a main number. It's 336-641-7233 or 641-SAFE. The Family Justice Center is open from 8:30 to 4:30 Monday through Friday. And that's not because that's when domestic violence happens. I've had people say, domestic violence happens in the middle of the night. I'm like, I am well aware. I like to use the analogy of it's sort of like Friendly Center. Friendly Center's open during the day, and there's lots of shops there. And if the public says enough, we would like more cheesecake at Friendly Center. So Friendly Center invites Cheesecake Factory to open up a shop there. Friendly Center's kind of making sure all the shops are there. They're all working on the same time. Each shop is responsible for their product and their personnel. But Friendly Center kind of makes sure the parking lot's well lit. All the shops are open at the same time. We're kind of working toward the thing. We want everybody to have a positive shopping experience. The Family Justice Center is the same way. From 8:30 to 4:30, all of the partner agencies are at the center doing their function and working there collaboratively and in connection. And after hours, just like there's Amazon.com and you can buy whatever you want at night, there's a crisis hotline with Family Services of Piedmont. There's 911 with law enforcement. So those emergency responses exist 24/7, but the place you come to put all the pieces together and make that action plan is from the Family Justice Center during the daytime.
Mm-hmm. And of course, by all means, beyond that, there's also 911. If
That's right.
Really,
That's right. That's right. And if someone's in a dangerous situation, we want them to call 911. And they do, and then 911 will go out there and triage the situation, and then they'll say, you should head to the Family Justice Center first thing in the morning. So that partnership's really strong with law enforcement.
That's really good that we have that, that somebody has that ability to, to call, or that, whoever responding agency has that, that in their back pocket that they can hand over and just be like, hey, here's somewhere you can go if you need help. That's really a huge benefit.
Oh yeah, and we have, law enforcement officers say all the time to us, we don't know what happens next. We go out there and do a 911 call, and then what's next? And depending on what's going on, we may send the patrol officer a note and say, I just want you to know you encouraged Ms. Johnson to come into the center, and she came in today, and she's on a pathway to safety. Thank you so much. And that's obviously with the consent of the person, like, hey, would you be okay if we let GPD know that you got what you needed? But we want to kind of create that more full circle, because what that means is that motivates police officers to do a good job, right? And I say this all the time, like the Family Justice Center is a huge benefit to the public who needs help, but it is also a huge benefit to professionals working in the field. We do surveys every year and compare like partners that work at the FJC compared to their home base, and they have lower burnout, less turnover, more job satisfaction working in the Family Justice Center, because it's a tough field. Reading child abuse cases all day long, or hearing about sexual violence or the exploitation of an older adult, the content is tough. But if we can create a work culture that is really mission-driven and collaborative and family-focused, we can mitigate some of those difficult topics and do really successful work, and it enhances the professionals as much as it enhances public safety and the needs of victims of crime.
Right. And, the one benefit to that as like a responder would be, because your job every day is, somebody's bad day, and you are seeing the worst of most of the worst of everybody's bad day. And you could probably go home most days and think that, this community is in crisis all the time. But to know that, at the end of that, there's some light at the end of the tunnel that reminds you of, why you signed up, why you went through academy, why you,
That's right.
why you did all you did to get here. Because I'm sure after, I'm just guessing, like, 15 years of being an officer or something like that, that could probably weigh on you. And but to know that there's some light, or that some people are getting, some help that they need, or getting out of their bad situation, is probably a good thing.
Yeah, one of our programs at the Family Justice Center is called Camp Hope, which is a camping and mentoring program for kids who've lived in abusive homes. And we get referrals, like moms can self-refer, or professionals, cops can make the referral, or any other partner agency. But it also creates a volunteer opportunity for partners working at the Family Justice Center to get to do fun things. Like this weekend, we're taking our Camp Hope kids ice skating downtown Greensboro. And if you work at the Family Justice Center and you want to volunteer, you can show up and hang out with a 10-year-old who's learning to ice skate. And it's silly and it's fun. And it reminds you, like, kids are resilient. And in addition to being able to bounce back, we can help propel them forward. And so we create these volunteer opportunities for people who are working in the center to see the other side of things, or get to be in a mentor role with a child who's been through a lot, who's also got big goals, and we want to help them meet those goals. And as rewarding as it is to the children, it is equally, if not more so, rewarding to the helper. And, I talk a lot about that. If we want a better community, we have to have healthy helpers. You make the point of, sometimes I have to remind myself, I'm like, I work with the 10% of worst of what happens in our community. And sometimes I can get down on it of like, gosh, we got a lot of problems. We've got really high crime for domestic related issues, and there's a lot of abuse and neglect. And I think that we've got some really dynamic solutions to help navigate that, and a lot of people who are committed to doing the right thing and helping people get the help that they need. And I'll say to my friends that don't work in violence and abuse at all, I'm like, you want to make our community safer? We invest in the people who are doing the jobs that you don't want to do. And they'll be like, you're right, I don't want to read child abuse cases. And I'm like, correct. I'm like, resource the people who are doing it so that they can do it to the best of their ability.
Yeah, that reminds me. So tell me about how you got into this type of work. You said you used to do family therapy and stuff like that. Tell me about how you got into this.
Yeah, so I actually did my undergraduate work at Florida State, and when I was in college, I thought that I would be like a forensic psychologist and work with psychopaths. That was like what I wanted to do. And
okay, why did you want to do
I know, I love the dark side. I would read these books, I'm like, oh yeah, I want to be like, I was in a psychology and law class, and my professor did psychiatric evaluations on murderers in the Florida State Penitentiary. And so I went into the penitentiary, watched him do psychological assessments on some really dangerous people. And while I loved it, after the second one, and he was a very wise faculty member, and he was a lawyer in town, and he was in his late 70s and still teaching. And he was like, Catherine, you would be great at this job, but you are so positive and you have so many gifts. I really don't want you to spend it inside a jail and prison. I think you ought to use those gifts and talents and help families and community. And it was a great mentoring advice. And he said, I think you should go the counseling route, because psychology, and this is over minimizing it, but it's like a medical model, right? You have a problem or a disease and we must treat it with medicine and intervention. We're the counseling model, and I went to UNCG and received my counseling degree, graduate degree, is much more about wellness and well-being. So where are you and how can we get you to wellness and well-being, or improving your well-being? And that just philosophically, even though I didn't know that as a college student, kind of fit. So while I was at UNCG getting my master's in marriage and family therapy, my very first internship placement was in Davidson County at Family Services of Davidson County. And yet again, another mentor relationship where the head of the clinical program there, my very first client was a 36-year-old woman who'd had a hysterectomy, who was feeling suicidal. It was just so heavy. And she sits down and she's wailing. And at the conclusion of the literally 50 minutes of her bawling, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, what am I doing? I'm going to ruin someone's life. She discloses that she was feeling that way because she was sexually abused by her grandfather as a child, and now that her sons were the age that she was when she was abused, she was having thoughts of harm. And she said, I want to protect my kids. I will take my own life to protect my kids. And I remember getting out of that session, I was like, that is too much. I'm 26 years old. And my supervisor, at that time, we recorded all the sessions, and he listened to it, and he was like, you have a real gift with working with people in crisis. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, So most people would have been like, pause, let me get my supervisor, I'm inadequate to help this person. He's like, but the skill set of being able to remain calm, being able to come up with solutions, being able to make a connection, he's like, those are innate traits that you can't teach. And so I say, like, violence and abuse kind of found me. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't thinking that that was the type of clinical work that I was going to do. And the more I worked with children and older adults, and my youngest client was a 3-year-old, my oldest was an 87-year-old, and there were some similarities between all those things. And I ended up getting promoted and becoming a crisis director and overseeing the shelter and a small clinical team and having that experience. And several people from Greensboro who were working on helping get the Family Justice Center going called me and they said, there's this really great job that you would be so good at. And I was like, well, first you have to work for the government, and I don't want to work for the government. I like nonprofit work. And they're like, no, I think it would be okay for you.
Why didn't you want to work for the government?
I just saw it as like my interactions early as a young professional were with kind of social services, and always saw there was so much bureaucracy and red tape and roadblocks. I'm like, I'm not sure I can thrive in that type of setting. But, I think our community did a great job when the Family Justice Center started, and I will attribute some of this to Commissioner Cashin's leadership of saying, we've got to get out of the way and let her help make this happen. If we bog it down and bury it in some internal department of government where she has to go through 10 layers of approvals before a decision can be made, we'll never get this thing off the ground. And that was with the support of the full board and then our advisory committee as well. And so kind of getting some of that red tape out of the way to help make the center get up and going, I'm really thankful for, and I think that had a big difference in our success when we even compare it to other things that have just kind of failed to launch because of just bogged down in politics and bureaucracy and other things.
I'm trying to see if there's anything we missed. Volunteers, you do volunteers?
Yeah, so we use volunteers for lots of things. So I mentioned the court accompaniment, so volunteers can help with accompanying survivors to court. We regularly recruit volunteers in our Camp Hope work, which is for young adults, 18 to 24, serve as perfect age for mentors for kids. And so we recruit every year to help young people. We recruit a lot from the local universities to help make that happen for our week of overnight camp. So there's lots of ways to get plugged in, and all that information is on our website.
Okay, cool. Donations? You guys do donations?
We do. So we're a little unique because we're an entity of local government, but we do do donations for two things. One is it's kind of a help the helper. So if a community member wanted to do a donation or provide a meal for the people that work at the Family Justice Center, that's a great way to show appreciation. And actually people really like that of like, yeah, a hot meal, somebody thought about me. We have regular churches who, what can we do? I'm like, you can bake hot cookies and drop them off at 2 o'clock, and I promise people will feel appreciated and they'll work even harder the rest of the afternoon. And then the second thing that we do, our predominant donations are for our Camp Hope program. So we raise almost $100,000 a year to help cover all of the program fees. That includes overnight camp for kids. Last year we had over 80 children that went to a week of overnight camp at YMCA Camp Weaver. That includes helping to fund different things if a family can't get what they need to get to be at a week of overnight camp or participate in our monthly gatherings. So we have lots of ways that we not only I talk about time, talent, and treasure. It's all three. We need the financial donations, but time and talent. If somebody has something to share, that can go a long way within our work too.
Mm-hmm. And so you talked about when is there all those camps coming up?
So overnight camp, we do a week this year because we've grown so much since we started in 2018. We're actually going to do 2 weeks of overnight camp, which is really exciting. And that happens in the summertime. And then they're year-round monthly group gatherings. So for example, we go ice skating. We have a partnership with the equine therapy group here in town and do a series of equine horseback riding lessons with kids where they learn a lot about themselves and the animal at the same time. So we plug in with a lot of different organizations to help make that year-round component happen. We have about 125, 150 children currently enrolled in the program, maybe actually a little bit more than that. And not everybody goes to overnight camp because overnight camp's not the right fit for all children, but that's kind of our big grand finale for the year, and then the year-round work starts after that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. That's good. Are there any other events or workshops or whatever that take place during the year?
Yeah, so we do a lot of community outreach, a lot of training. We have a program called Friends Against Fraud, which targets seniors, and we know frauds and scams are rampant amongst all people, not just seniors, but older adults are uniquely targeted by fraudsters and scammers. So we do quite a bit around fraud and scam prevention and training in that area, community engagement in that area. We train on high-risk things like strangulation being a dangerous form of abuse, and train professionals working in the field so that they're as informed as possible. We plug into a lot of community events, and then a lot of our partner agencies participate in a ton of outreach. So we tag along with them or help support them in getting their name and message out there as well. So we stay pretty busy. Last year, I think we did several hundred community outreach events and touched 5,000 or 6,000 people. So we stay pretty busy in that connection and helping support our partners and being connected as well.
Wow, that's amazing. That's good. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we missed here. You have 2 locations, one in Greensboro, one in High Point?
So we have 2 locations. We have our Greensboro office, and then our High Point office opened in 2018, and also kind of a thriving center. That center's a little unique. It's within the courthouse, so you can access it from the street or from inside the courthouse. So it's like a little courthouse-based model. But that center helps 5,000 people a year, which for the city of High Point, that's pretty good compared to our Greensboro offices helping more around 10,000 people a year. But staying busy and, very much the same model. The police department is probably the biggest different partner. High Point Police Department's in that center versus Greensboro being here in the Greensboro office.
Mm-hmm. And PD is mostly, I guess, how people would refer people to you, right?
So law enforcement, about a third of our clients come from a law enforcement referral, a 911 call. Lots of people that are living with in unsafe relationships never call the police. So there are plenty of people who are navigating it and battling it on their own, and they come into the center for help too. So law enforcement is a primary referring partner, and we work a lot with them because while Family Justice Center works about access for victim safety, it's about offender accountability. So if someone is doing harm, we want to help gather as much evidence as possible to have that person prosecuted and held accountable. We do not want them to have their case dismissed or get away with it. Because when they get away with it, they go and get a different victim, or they come back home to the victim they've harmed and harm them again. So we want to make sure that people are held accountable for the crimes that they're committing. And so that takes some finesse, right? We want to make sure victims stay plugged in and active in the criminal justice process. We also want to make sure if a defendant says a judge says don't call her, don't come around her, don't go anywhere her kids are, and they violate it, we want them charged for the violation of the court order, which again begins to increase that accountability to deter that behavior from happening.
Oh, that's good. I want to go back to something that I remember from early on in this interview. Was you said in 2012 there was like a huge uptick. That was the reason for the Family Justice Center. Is there any reason why there is such a high number of abuse cases? I mean, can we pinpoint it to one thing or just a societal whatever? I don't know. That's a big question. I know
Yeah.
that.
I mean, I think it's complicated. It's a complicated issue, which is why we can't solve it simply, right? It takes a complicated response. Domestic violence homicides have been higher since COVID. We saw the homicide rate drop almost 90% between 2015 and 2019, and then 2020 happened, and it was this period of isolation. And when you're isolated with the person who's harming you and you lack access to other supportive services, we know that domestic and sexual violence can happen to anyone, people with no money and people with lots of money, but we also know that people in poverty are disproportionately impacted. And so, making sure that we are kind of doing those same things in a system where we're addressing poverty and helping people get the resources that they need, while also saying that, people who do harm will be held accountable and creating those access points for victims. But there is no singular thing we can pinpoint. I do talk quite a bit about how family violence is the root of a lot of issues, and it's often the thing that's probably not taken seriously until it's really egregious. And if we look at gang problems or drug problems or major crime impacting problems in cities across the country, I can promise you if we were to do an inventory of child trauma or family violence, 100% of those people committing that level of crime would have a connection back to either witnessing abuse, being abused themselves, or being neglected in their home. And if we put a little more energy on the front end of addressing those issues versus waiting until they become big, huge issues, I think that would help. But I also think it's a very complicated problem, which creates, the need for really complicated solutions too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was just something I was just thinking of. But yeah, I guess that's, we could wrap this thing up unless there's anything else. Is there anything else we haven't addressed here that we could, that you want to address that I haven't talked about?
I mean, you asked really good questions, so I feel like we covered it.
Okay, cool. Well, again, thank you so much for being on. Again, how can people contact you if they're in crisis, abuse, or if they know somebody? How can they contact you?
So the main number to the Family Justice Center is 336-641-7233. You can call that number anytime, and if it's after hours, it rolls over to Family Services of Piedmont's Crisis Hotline. Our Greensboro office is located at 201 South Green Street, just across the street from the city municipal buildings. We're open 8:30 to 4:30. One of the things I really try to emphasize, I guess I'll say two things. One thing I really try to emphasize is if you're at home and you think this is you think that I don't feel safe or comfortable in my relationship, or this shouldn't feel this way. You don't have to have experienced an assault or a serious threat to come into the center to help. No issue is too minimal. We want to be that place. We would love to meet with people before things escalate to the form of physical abuse. That same goes for financial exploitation or sexual exploitation. There's no challenge that's too small. If you're thinking that, then we want you to come in and start that dialogue with us so that we can help you get the support that you need.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate this. It's been very informative.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for being here.